This podcast was sponsored by A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family owned and operated.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you may be tuned in today. We welcome you back to another edition of the Vickers Crossing podcast. The Vickers Crossing is a virtual space where faith intersects with the public square. And my name is Rob Henderson. It's good to see everybody. We'll be back again. I'm the priest director at Holy Trinity St. Stephen's Anglican Church here in London.
Across the table here is Revi Kevy. This is Kevin George coming at you from St. Aidan's Church in London, Ontario. Glad to be back. We've got, this starts a few incredible weeks for us, so we have an incredible guest. Very excited for today. So I'm here with the dude in his bedroom.
Yeah, that's me. My name is Ian. I'm residing within my bedroom in my house.
And we welcome in our special guest today. We're thrilled to have Leighton Williams on the Vickers Crossing. Hi, Leighton. How are you?
Hey, I'm great. Happy to be here.
Good. Leighton's in South Carolina today.
Ooh. Probably a tad warmer than here, you think, Robin?
Yeah, what'd you say, about 80 degrees?
80, 85.
Ooh, man.
So,
great.
getting my hands for the year already.
Well, we're so happy to have you here. We're going to be talking a bit about your book and some other things that you're involved in as well. And Kevin will give you a little more of a formal introduction to our listeners coming up in just a minute. I do want to say hi to our sponsor, though, today, of course, as always, A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family owned and operated. To Dave and the staff there, we say hello and thanks, as always, for supporting the podcast. So just a quick check-in with each other. It's been about a week or so, I think, since we've got together. Ian, anything exciting going on in Ian's room? Don't get too personal.
Nothing personal, okay? PG.
Family show.
Listen, I've been writing music because what else am I going to do in this quarantine time? I have plans that I'm not going to express at this very moment because they're not done yet, but I do have plans, and that's all I'm going to say on that.
Big T's.
Yeah.
Big T's coming out of that bedroom, eh?
Get excited. It's exciting. We live in exciting times.
All right.
Yeah.
What's going on with you, Kevin?
Oh, well, I took a break last week. Took a little 3-day hiatus. Found that all this sort of COVID stuff has gotten me a little bit tired. So we did some COVID care and shut myself down for 3 days. A little bit aggravating. There's nowhere to go. Like, you couldn't go do anything. It wasn't like Catherine and I could take off and go out of town or do something, or if I could pop over to the pub in the afternoon and have a beer or whatever. So it was a little bit aggravating, but nonetheless, the good part of it was I slept lots, I read lots. I've been reading Lord of the Rings at 49 years of age. I've discovered Tolkien. Not that I didn't know he existed, but I hadn't read it. And so that's what I've been at. And the other thing I've been at is, and I did sort of break my hiatus a little bit to talk to the mayor's office. Mayor Ed Holder here in the City of London has asked myself and Rabbi Deborah Dressler and Imam Munir El-Qassem to organize an interfaith prayer event for the city. And so with the cooperation of the Office of the Mayor, we've planned this thing that'll bring together, I think, about 10 different faith traditions for Sunday, May the 31st at 7:30 p.m. And it's called Many Faiths, One Voice, Interfaith Prayer for the Forest City. And we are going to host that on our YouTube platform, actually. I'm proud to announce here on the Vickers Crossing. As we focus on faith in the public square, this is a great opportunity for us to provide space for this event to take place. So just plan to go to our YouTube channel on Sunday night at 7:30 when the video goes live, and you'll be able to take in these prayers for healing, for unity, and for hope in this time of crisis, that we can do what we can to support others together across faiths and across traditions. So that's what's been up.
All right, very good. No, and I just saying to Leighton before we started to record the podcast today that I've spent a lot of time on Zoom, as a lot of people have, and I'm tired of it. But at the same time, as I hear you talking, I'm thankful for it because the reality we're in is the reality we're in. But we have this wonderful opportunity to be able to reach out through this platform and through Zoom or through teleconferencing and be able to have these prayer services or be able to connect to our neighbors and other denominations and such in and around our community. So it's a good thing to have, but at the same time, it would be nice to have a kind of a balance of having a few actual live people around the table with you every once in a while. So, good. We'll look forward to that coming up on the 31st then. So Kevin, would you like? Oh, actually, before we introduce Leighton, we got to do one more thing here because it's time for a very special part of the Vickers Crossing podcast, which draws in people from all over the globe who listen to the podcast. Because aside from all the yakking that we do every week, people want to know more about what's going on in Ian's brain than anything else.
That's true.
So it's time now for another edition of
Ask Ian anything.
I love how cheesy this is because we can't do the soundboard thing in person to make the sounds. It's just
doing it on my phone.
The dissonance between your mouth movements and that.
It's bad.
Have you ever seen any of those Japanese movies, Leighton, where they're dubbed over and it's like the mouth goes and then the sound comes later? That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, I can see that.
A little odd. Okay. So we do have a question today from a local listener.
Ooh.
Yeah. So it's actually a two-pronged question on connected points. First question is to you alone. The second question, I'll check in with the three of us too, see what we think.
Right.
So first question is specifically for you. Ian.
Yes.
This question comes from a young fellow here in the north of London, young fellow by the name of Todd Townsend, the Right Reverend, Bishop
Big man.
of Huron.
Big man.
Man with whom we are familiar. The only two-time guest on the Vickers Crossing.
Absolutely.
He's well revered here. He wants to ask Ian, what do you like best, Ian, about the Vickers Crossing as a listener? In all the things you've listened to over the last year and a half or 2 years, we've had guests across all kinds of spectrums. What is it that you like the best?
How many stories there are. How many people have such an interesting sort of background and humanity, and just the life that people have that's outside of mine is just incredible. Just to have a window in, an hour-long window, just to hear someone else's story. It's like a new story every week, and it's amazing that there's these point of views and these perspectives of all kinds of people. It's really cool. Yeah.
All right, I like that. Now the second question from the bishop, equally profound.
Yes.
Is can you? What would you name as the best Rolling Stones song of all time? He says that's impossible. #. But
okay. So I believe Rolling Stones, they created the song "Satisfaction," correct?
yes.
That song that song came out at a specific time period that allowed for heavier music and the rock that we sort of know and appreciate today. So I'm going to say that song because of its cultural impact in the time and period.
Listen to Mr. Music Industry and Arts here.
Come on, ask me anything. Ask me anything. I'm on a roll.
He's giving us the background now. What about you, Robbie? Greatest Rolling Stones hit?
I like Satisfaction. I was thinking of Waiting on a Friend.
Oh, I like that too.
Love that tune. Yeah.
What about you, Leighton?
It's possible I'm Googling Rolling Stones' greatest hits. I'm sure I have many songs of theirs I love, but I can't name one off the top of my head.
I would. All right. Well, while you're thinking of one, if you come up with one, I will say I like Angie.
Yeah. Angie.
I like that.
That's good.
Those are good questions, and we thank the bishop for chiming in there. I tweeted out last night a request for questions, and I was flooded. So we have questions for the next couple of weeks, but don't let that stop you, listeners. If you've got questions for Ian, send them in because we will get to them. And if they're the sort of things that he's able to answer as snappily as he did today, you may even ask two on one show.
Wow.
Ian is the new Alexa. You just ask him and he'll tell you.
Ian, play my favorite Rolling Stones.
Well, Kevin, we're thrilled to have author, poet, writer Leighton Williams from South Carolina with us today. Would you give her a formal introduction to our listeners, please?
I will indeed. A less formal thing is I picked up a book called From Her Mouth, Psalms. What's the subtitle, Leighton? Remind me.
Psalms for the Struggle. The words of her mouth, Psalms for the Struggle. Mm-hmm.
Psalms for the Struggle. And I really loved it. And one of the people who was most profiled in there, a lot of her poetry was in there, was Leighton Williams. And that was my introduction to her. And then I did a little Googling, and I found a book, an incredible book called Holy Disunity. And I bought it and I chewed it up very quickly. And I was like, holy heck, we got to have Leighton on this podcast. So that you know a little bit more about who she is. She's an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church, or she likes to call it, she's a Presby Rev. She's a writer. She works as director of the New Dawn Ministries at Sunrise Church in Sullivan Island, South Carolina, and as a communication specialist for Next, N-E-X-T Church, capital letters. She previously served as a pastoral resident at Fourth Presbyterian Church in Chicago, which I can testify is an incredible place. I studied in Chicago, and that place was just, and at McCormick, which is a Presbyterian school, so that church is legendary. And then as an audience engagement editor at Sojourners, which is one of my favorite publications. She's earned an MDiv from Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary in Austin, Texas, and currently lives in Charleston, South Carolina, where she seeks to minister in ways that offer understanding, justice, and relationship in the midst of division. And she is in the midst of a reopening of a state, and so hopefully she's safe and sound down there.
I'm trying.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Did I miss anything?
No, that was quite comprehensive. Thank you.
Good. Well, let's just jump right into a few questions and see where our conversation leads us. Honestly, your writing is a breath of fresh air, Leighton, and a real gift. I know that this may be your first, I think, this book, Holy Disunity, but I know it won't be your last because the writing your writing is incredible, but also your theology and your willingness to engage the question is quite great. And that's the sort of thing that'll go on with you forever, I'm sure. So let me just ask you, you no doubt have reflections about the role of church or faith in the public because you've identified that as one of the things that you feel most strongly about. And that's sort of what our shtick is here at Vickers Crossing, faith in the public square. Your bio says that your work focuses on the intersections of faith, politics, advocacy, and culture on your webpage, with a particular emphasis on sexuality and gender issues, gender justice. We're fresh off of the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia, and you write about being bisexual in your book. And if I could just quote a little bit of it, you wrote, "While I have no explicit memory of being taught in church that homosexuality was wrong, I certainly got the message. At first, in my early teens, I determined that actions mattered more than feelings. And I decided that if I ever realized I might not be straight, I would refuse to act on that realization. Over the years, as I realized I knew and loved people who were gay, lesbian, and bisexual, I rejected that theology and believed that those who were gay and bisexual and trans were beloved by God exactly as they were. I thought I was certain. I thought that my questions around that theology had been dealt with, but when I could no longer avoid the truth that I myself was queer, I was suddenly flooded with doubts and questions again." Where are we now? I mean, we just came off of this weekend. There are people of faith out there who would say, why do we even have pride? Why are there pride parades? Why are there international days against homophobia, etc.? How do you respond to that when people still bring that up today as though there's still not a need to continue to work towards justice? Thinking of church, why is it important that we continue to speak up, to come alongside and be allies?
Yeah, there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
I think I would start by saying, in answer to your first question about where are we now, I think as the church collectively, we're a little bit all over the map, right? In my Peace USA denomination, I want to say was it 8 or 9 years ago? Can't do math. 2011, 9 years ago, was when we started allowing for the ordination of LGBTQ folks 3 years after that was when we changed or expanded our definition of marriage, or clarified it, depending on how you want to phrase it. Meanwhile, I have a lot of good friends in the United Methodist Church that are queer or trans or allies, and are really struggling with the ongoing sort of political debate within that denomination. And, you know, I'm down here in the Deep South after 10 years away in various, perhaps more overtly liberal spaces. And so it's a different conversation here, too, than it was in DC or Chicago or even Austin, Texas. So yeah, I think we're in a lot of different places, and that's one reason why I think it still matters to keep having these conversations and celebrating these realities. When somebody asks me or like expresses that sort of disgruntled, I think the way I would phrase it is, look, I don't care how people identify. I just don't need them to have like a whole parade about it. Like, why do we have to like make it this whole shiny thing? I try from a place of genuine curiosity, not like passive aggression, at least on my good days, to kind of throw that question back to them and say, well, let's talk about why there's a distinction in those things for you.
I think we've lost you there, Leighton. We've just had an interrupted. Your audio is dropped.
My sound just.
There you go.
There you go.
Sorry about that. I'm not sure what that was. Where did you lose me?
I didn't mute you, I promise.
No, just where did I go away?
You were just sort of saying that when people sort of push back and say, "What do you have to have all those parades and do all that stuff?"
Yeah, so I just try to dig into where
on your less passive aggressive days, is what you said.
Yes. On my more curious and less passive aggressive days, I try to dig into the reasoning behind why drawing attention to it or celebrating makes somebody uncomfortable. And I think there can be different reasons. I think, you know, perhaps my most cynical view is that they're not really as comfortable with LGBTQ inclusion as they want to believe they are. But I also think sometimes people just generally have unresolved processing to do around sex and embodiment in the church in general. And so, you know, cultural celebrations of things that really highlight that can make people uncomfortable, even if it isn't about the specific identity. And so I think getting people to sort of recognize where their own issues are coming into play is kind of how I try to go about it, to like build this space for empathy and relationship and sort of mutual curiosity. As far as why I think it still matters for the church to show up, I think we just have a lot of centuries, a lot of years of really failing LGBTQ people, and not just them, but including them. And it is, I think, the work of many generations to start to heal and repair some of that damage. So I think it is the work of the church and part of its witness to outspokenly and overtly affirm what the church spent so many years calling abomination.
Right.
I always find too in church land, it's just you pointed to it there. It's so hard for us to have what are sometimes really difficult conversations with each other. Like you would think that when we come into loving communities and communities that we know each other and we learn to trust each other, that we would be able to sit down and have these conversations and be able to say, you know, I want to try to get to the root of why it's uncomfortable for me to be worried about whether there's a parade or a this or that or the other thing. And but we also know that we're called to have those difficult conversations, and that's the grace and beauty of being in community, is that we should be able to have that safe place where we can talk about these things and learn more about ourselves.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Leighton.
I was just going to say, I think, you know, my experience around that, and that really is the crux of my work, is we don't trust each other as much as we want to claim that we do, and that we actually think our communities are more fragile than we claim that they are. so that if we come bringing our full selves, our full discomforts, the opinions we're afraid to express, or like the questions that we're afraid will point out our own ignorance, I think we don't bring those things because we're afraid that everything will fall apart. And the reality is, if that is true, then we haven't built the community that we thought we have, and we have more work to do.
Right.
Yeah, there's community, there's authentic community. I think authentic community is us being able to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's a lot of the work we have to do.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kevin, I cut you off.
No, man. Part of this medium. I was just going to say, yeah, 100%. I think that sometimes we and you address this a lot in your book, but a lot of times we say that people behave as though unity trumps justice, right? That unity at all costs. And so instead of actually having the discussion, or some people will call it an argument or a disagreement, we just don't have it. And if you don't have it, then you can pretend. And this goes to what Rob was just saying about authenticity. You can pretend that everything is okay, but is it really?
Right.
And so I just want to pick up a little bit from there, Leighton, because there's a great story I read in Holy Disunity, and you title it "Beauty Secrets from a Snake," which I thought was, as soon as I read the title, I'm going, okay, I got to see what this is. So it's a case study in the benefits of doubt, and there are benefits to our doubts, and you kind of draw that out for us. And you write of some learnings that you had from a snake. So I just wanted to read a little bit for folks from the book. You wrote, sometimes embracing doubt means learning that you have nothing to be afraid of. And sometimes it means doing unimaginably hard things. And sometimes it means discovering truth and hope that you can't imagine having gone the entire rest of your life without. Can you tell us, our listeners, a little bit about that story of the snake and how you kind of came to understand that understanding of doubt?
Sure, I would love to. And just as a little piece of trivia, I will tell you that story was the very first part of this book that I wrote, and has been sort of part of my story for a long time. I've told it many times. So yeah, not to give the 20-page version, but I always say that I had like one foot dancing outside of the closet for about a decade before I actually came out. So it's not that I was totally unaware, but I also had some pretty deeply ingrained resistance, I think. And I got to seminary, and in one of our very first theology classes, our professor, Cindy Rigby, started talking about a God who, being Trinitarian, is in relationship within God's own being. So relationship is quintessential to who God is, authentic relationship. And that to be created in the image of God means that we too are created for authentic relationship. And all of a sudden I knew that I couldn't be a pastor unless I could be authentic with the people in my life that I loved, and with myself and with God. And so my whole world kind of blew up like 2 weeks into my first semester of seminary. And I finally falling for a classmate of mine at the time, and was finally sort of acknowledging this possibility, but also trying to avoid it, because all of a sudden I was flooded with this, like, is this when I lose my mom, right? Is this, at the time I wanted to be a youth pastor, and in my head I was like, who's going to hire a youth pastor who's queer? It was just all these, like, your brain goes to all the scary places. And so I was avoiding my thoughts. And then one day in one of my classes, we were instructed to go out into nature and find a creature or natural object and commune with it and listen quietly for about 45 minutes to what it had to say to us, which was the last thing I wanted to do, was like sit in silence anywhere where my thoughts could have free reign. But I went, and I was going to sit in my favorite spot on campus, the storm drain overlooking this creek, and I was going to look for a squirrel because I like squirrels. And so I go and I settle down, and after a few minutes I hear this rustling on the other bank, and I'm like looking for what I imagine is surely a squirrel. And then this snake, this like big black snake, slithers out from under some leaves on the opposite bank. And a crucial detail here is like very few things in this world freak me out more than snakes. So I was like on my feet. Yeah, I mean, I think even on some level it wasn't a poisonous snake or venomous snake, but I was on my feet, ready to run back inside and hide. But because I was a new seminarian and I, was looking for signs of the Spirit everywhere, I thought, all right, maybe this is meant to happen. Maybe I'm supposed to learn something. And so I literally forced my body back down. And over the course of the next, 30, 45 minutes, I watched this snake as it made its way along the bank. I watched it eat a frog, which was gross, but also kind of cool. And I just kept thinking about how terrified I was of this creature and how convinced I was that there was something inherently bad about snakes, all because that's what I had been taught, specifically kind of taught by my own religion and, our origin story with the Garden of Eden, and how constructed all of that was, but how I also knew that snakes, just like every other creature, were created in love by God. And then I was like crying, weeping on this storm frame in the middle of my seminary campus, because I was thinking about how that's exactly how I was feeling about myself, right? That at some point I had bought into this narrative that I'd been taught, again, mostly by my religion, that there was something intrinsically bad about me if I was queer, and how I actually knew on a deeper level that that wasn't true, that I was created in love by God, and that my capacity for love was created by God and called good. And that was really the moment that I think I finally I don't think I ever went back from that. Like, that was the day where I was like, all right, this is true about me and there's no going back. And I went home, the end of the story, which I always think is eerie but cool, is I went home that day and I wrote about it in my blog, but like very vaguely. Like, I didn't say what it was all about because I definitely wasn't out. And my only dedicated blog reader was my mom. And so when she hadn't commented like 2 or 3 days later or talked to me about it, I started to freak out that she had like read it and knew what it was about. And so I finally texted her to check in and be like, hey, did you see that? And she was like, yeah, I have to call you. There's a thing I need to talk about or something. It was so eerie. I was like, ah, crap. And she calls me and she tells me that she had like read my blog on Wednesday morning and that the night before she had this dream that somebody was forcing her to hold a snake. And she didn't want to, and she was afraid, and she kept trying to resist, but she had to. And so she held the snake, and in the dream, she says she still didn't like it, but she realized she didn't have to be afraid and that it was okay. And then she says, and then I woke up and I read your blog. And of course, she's like, what a weird coincidence. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, whoa. So, I mean, it was a while after that before I came out to her, but I think that moment brought me some kind of like mystical comfort that maybe things would be okay in the end.
Amazing. That's an amazing story. It really is. It's like, I was reading it and I'm thinking, okay, let me get this straight. You're sitting outside in somewhat of a garden-like atmosphere. You're confronted by a snake, which completely changes everything about you. And your whole view about yourself, your worldview and everything else. Like, I've heard that.
Yeah. Well, and I have a squirrel here.
Is that a nutcracker?
It's a nutcracker. I gotta say, when I read it, what came to mind, when I read your story, what came to mind was the story of Moses speaking to God. And he says, I've got this unruly bunch of crybaby arseholes that are really pissing me off. What am I going to do with them? And they get to the bit about the snakes, and he's instructed to put the snake on a stick and hold it up in front of them, that their deliverance would come from facing what they were most scared of, which was the snake. And so I was really taken by that it was the same image for me. As I read your story, you became the people of God in that exile or that wilderness, and to me it was and your mom's dream, so this notion of the snake being held up in front of you as, look, I know you're afraid of this, and of course it's allegory for a whole lot more, but you don't need to be afraid. You face it, Powerful.
Wow, I had not made that connection. I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So Ian had a question for you.
Yes, it is my turn. So probably you are aware I'm a songwriter, and one of your poems was sent to me from your book, The Words of Her Mouth, Psalms of the Struggle, and the one that was sent to me was a Stranger Peace, which is a cool title. And I read it, and it was really interesting to sort of to be asked a question and not have it resolved within the poem. And I wanted to know if you could read that for us, and then sort of elaborate and reflect on where it came from, sort of the background behind it, and then another big question, sort of give us your opinions on the times that we're living in right now with COVID and with the big orange President Trump, who happens to be in your country. So just a very large question there, but
Lots of uncertainty, that's for sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So I will read the poem first, and it is reflecting on and based on verses 6 and 7 from Psalm 122, which say, "Praise the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. Peace be within your wall and security within your towers." And so the poem says, "There was a shooting on Sunday, and yesterday talks of nuclear war. And this morning at the gym, the TV screens all flashed politicians spewing twisted rhetoric. And I wonder, is it getting worse like it feels it is, or has it always been this bad? This weekend, I will drive to my brother's house and scoop up my niece, and my nephew will run over to hug me hello, their joy juxtaposed with everything else this week has shown me. And I will wonder, as I often do, will they ever know a happy world? Will they ever even know what peace is? Have we ever even known what peace is? Or is it such an utter stranger that we would pass it on the street begging for help and avert our eyes, hurrying on into the broken world, unwilling to spare the necessary change?" Yeah. I actually hadn't revisited that one in a while until I saw that you were going to bring it up. So thank you for that. I have to tell y'all that this is the first time I've published my poetry other than on Facebook and my blog. And I mostly write my poetry for myself, so I appreciate when other people say nice things about it.
Okay, let me just jump in for a second and say that the poems that are in that book that were compiled by Martha Spong of yours, they're all great. But I have to say that yours struck a particular chord with me. I think you saw I tweeted one of them very early on. And I think there's a lot of them that speak to now. So Ian's question is quite poignant in terms of the day that we're in and the uncertainties that are there. So
yeah, well, and I was trying to remember because you'd asked about the context for that poem. It said a lot about our current reality that it's hard to know which day I would say there was a shooting last Sunday. Yeah. Timeline-wise, I think it may have been the shooting in El Paso, but I'm not 100% sure. Yeah. But I do distinctly remember, as I have felt many times in the last couple of years, since I moved home a couple of years ago, and I now see my niece and nephew almost every day. And I spend a lot of time thinking about, if I have kids, like, what world am I bringing them into? And like these 6 nieces and nephews of mine that I'm like watching grow up, what sort of world will they inherit? And I'm not a naturally cynical person, but these days it just seems like even pre-pandemic, there's just such a constant onslaught of negative news, of climate devastation, right? And of broiling violence the world over, and politicians that seem purely interested in stirring the pot and stroking their own egos. And I think I wrote that poem from a place of like, well, 2 things. One, a sort of not sure I can believe in the possibility of peace, or that we would, as I say in the poem, even recognize it if we came upon true peace. But also, I mean, I think what struck me in the original psalm is that it's such an insular notion of peace. It's peace for Jerusalem within our walls and within our towers. And I remember thinking that dissatisfied me, that I thought only seeking peace for ourselves and our people is a big part of what's gotten us into the mess that we're in today. And yeah, I mean, I think to y'all's point, in our current reality, I think the biggest theme is this uncertainty, right? And I think certainly I am being confronted in this time with, somebody else said it this way, I think on Twitter, talking about our addiction to control, and our addiction to the myth of certainty, and that it's always been an illusion, but it's being laid bare in this moment when these massive things are happening that we're realizing just how little in our lives is within our control. And yeah, I mean, I think on my good days, I think, this can ultimately be, I don't know, a refining experience, right? Like that it sort of strips things bare and gives us a choice to move forward differently. And on my bad days, I think about how much of the discourse right now is different people shaming other people about any number of things related to all of this. And I feel a little less hopeful about our capacity to choose a better path forward. But I hope to be wrong, I'll say that.
Well, yeah, it certainly can be a roller coaster, isn't it? It's an up and down thing. What I heard when I was listening to the words of your poem, Leighton, was that truth or connection that wherever we are on that roller coaster, whether we're thinking in the moment that it's just not going to happen, or whether we're thinking real good things about peace and such, we all share the same human desire to have it. Mm-hmm. Like that's the root of it right there. And when we refer to our better angels together and be able to again go back to what we said, be vulnerable and say, yeah, this is what we want. This is what we dream of. This is our hope. Mm-hmm. This is, the kingdom that we long for and want to participate with God in moving into. That it maybe takes the little edge off those bad days on the roller coaster, but we certainly connect with that, don't we?
It reminds me of a song. Sorry, you go.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I was just gonna say it reminds me of a song by John Bellion called "The Wonder Years," and he wrote the song after watching his niece and nephew playing in a park, and one of the bridge lyrics goes, "They're lying on the damn news. Economy is down too. They're lying on the damn news. People murdering for damn shoes, and my niece is blowing bubbles in the yard." Mm-hmm. It's that sort of idea of just like, yeah, that's what it reminded me of. Yeah.
It's pretty cool, actually, and that's a great juxtaposition. And I think that, and what you said, Rob, about vulnerability, I think really leads into where I want to go next. And I think that the thing I struggle with, but when Rob talks about the better angels of our nature, and as you say, I'm on our best days, Leighton, it's really getting harder. And I think that the sad truth about that is because we have powers and principalities. And I don't normally talk this way, but I mean, certainly, I don't usually talk about the enemy, but it feels like the enemy is pretty loud this year. 2020 is the year of the enemy. But it's politically, we have this reality right now in the world. Look at what Bolsonaro is doing in Brazil and Trump is doing in the United States where you are, and in right-wing regimes across different places. More and more, the tool that's used is dividing. They're using disunity, which you talk about as something that's holy, but they're using it as something to drive us apart. And I think that largely sometimes we don't get there. We don't get to that place of seeing the holiness of disunity because we're afraid to be vulnerable, and that's being exploited. Our fear of that vulnerability is really being exploited, and we're being told to be afraid. Be afraid of the other. Be afraid of the one who's different. Be afraid of your vulnerability. Be afraid to tell the truth about who you are. Be afraid to let others know the truth about who you are. You write, Jesus is living and dying and resurrecting. All of it is about Jesus choosing to be with us in our suffering and our pain, even when he could choose to escape or avoid it. More than that, by sharing in our struggles, Jesus can overcome our brokenness in ways we just can't on our own and never could. The call to take up your cross and follow me isn't about silently embracing or even enduring our own pain. It is about allowing ourselves to be open and vulnerable to the struggles and humanity of others. Talk to us about why that vulnerability is important, Leighton. Explain to us, help us because I know you write about it so beautifully. Share with our listeners about why being vulnerable, especially now, because I think it's now that we have to do it. Like, why is vulnerability so important?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it is crucial in this moment and hard. And I want to start by saying, Rob, one thing you said that really struck me is you talked about the vulnerability inherent in claiming or belief in the kingdom, right? That even so vulnerability, I think sometimes we get this image of it as only negative things, right? Like, I'm going to let you see me cry. I'm going to let you see this deep wound in me. And the joke here, right, is they say preachers preach the sermon they need to hear, and I think writers write the book they need to hear. I'm not great at this, vulnerability. I can write about it all day, but I think to bring witness to even hopes of other people, right? The things that they, like, having that shared with you is a type of vulnerability. And what all of those types of sharing have in common is getting to glimpse one another's humanity in a way that we can't in sort of our surface level, even well-intentioned conversations. And I think the shift that happens is actually, going back to our earlier conversation, a lack of control. Once you let somebody in that way, whether you're the one opening up or the one receiving, both of those are vulnerability, you can no longer screen them or completely control their capacity to impact you and your view of the world. And that's why it's so crucial, because what comes from othering people and convincing us to be afraid of each other is in the absence of that vulnerability and connection, we convince ourselves that other people are less human than us, are less than human, and therefore don't deserve, I guess, the same sort of level of engagement and respect and whatever that we would think about for somebody that we have let in.
I wanted to look ahead to Sunday and talk a little bit about this Sunday on our church calendar. We're getting ready to celebrate the Feast of the Ascension, or Ascension Sunday. And there's a part of your book in Holy Disunity. You write a little bit of a section on how to live in a post-ascension world. So I thought reading that this week was certainly timely. And you write this, you say, Jesus' advice about how to live in the face of inevitable uncertainty is: we can know without knowing. We can trust what it's about without understanding. And that this is good news for us, caught as we are in the space between Christ's living on earth and his coming again. And then from there, you go on to share a bit of your reflections on living and being in a post-ascension people. We just mentioned the uncertain times we're living in, and given our current situation, it seems a pretty timely observation right now. So what is it about being a post-ascension people? What were you trying to get at when you were using that phrase and creating that image?
Yeah.
I can interrupt. Basically, Rob and I are looking for a sermon on Sunday.
Yes.
Well, it's funny, we're in a sermon series right now, so I'm not even preaching on the Ascension this Sunday. I'm like totally lost the thread until I saw your notes. But I will say this section of the book stems from a sermon for Ascension Sunday a few years ago. Okay. But yeah, so I don't know about where y'all are from, but where I'm from, people are fond of saying we're an Easter people in a Good Friday world. And framing that as like, yes, the world is still hard and broken and all these things, but we are rooted in resurrection. And I think that is a true and powerful sentiment, but not one that's necessarily always you connect to when we are stumbling through an unprecedented reality. And so I find more comfort in the Ascension story when you have, Jesus is giving his disciples advice, still teaching them, And then he's just gone. He's just like, all right, peace out, mid-sentence. And they're just kind of left like, is that it? Like, okay. And, you know, it's 10 days, I think, until Pentecost, when supposedly everything's resolved because the Spirit comes. But of course, we know everything's still confusing. And so I love feeling connected to those disciples in that moment where, yes, they had the advantage of, you know, being taught by Jesus in person, but we also have those teachings, right? But then they end at some point, and they can't speak into every moment, you know, and every reality you encounter. And so instead, you're left to sort of improvise and do the best you can, leaning on what you know so far, right? I meant to, this past Sunday, I preached on Philippians 4. We're doing a series on prayer, but it was, and this past week was petitionary prayer, asking for help. But the passage, I think it was 4-9, and I can't quote it because I'm Presbyterian and we don't do that. But
we don't either.
The one that ends with like,
with us.
Okay, good. You know, it ends with like, whatever is good, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable. If there's any excellence and anything worthy of praise, lean on these things or think upon these things and continue to do as you have learned and been taught or something. And I love that in the context of this conversation, because it's basically saying like, yeah, I know it's super confusing. I can't tell you the exact right answer for everything, but just like lean into the good that you know and like trust in what you've been taught. And then figure it out as you go and sort of like reckon with the uncertainty of it all, you know?
Yeah, and that's the thing, like you said, that's the space, right? That's the space we're caught in, where we don't have all the answers. And that what I love about the ascension and the whole idea and concept of the ascension is this idea, of course, that Jesus is gone, but not.
Yeah.
And that's the space, right? That we're in right now. And anyways, just trying to navigate that and find our way through it. And the themes of vulnerability and authenticity and these types of things are all played out within that space. And we have the opportunity to live in that. Yeah.
And not having. Go ahead, Leighton. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, because I can't let it go without telling this quick piece, which is, I'm pretty sure this must be in that chapter of the book, based on how I phrased this, but there's this great story about Madeleine L'Engle being at a book reading, and this little girl tells her that she's just read, I think it was A Wrinkle in Time, and Madeleine L'Engle was impressed, but also I think a little dubious, because this girl was very young, like maybe 8 or 9, and so L'Engle asks her, did you understand it? And she says, I didn't understand it, but I knew what it was about.
That's right.
And there's just something, right? There's something meaty in there for us. My theology professor actually is the one who told me that story first. And I have clung to it ever since in spaces of uncertainty and questioning. That we don't have to all figured out, you know?
Right. It's that business. Go ahead, Robbie.
I was just going to say, I was just reading, rereading Tom Wright's book on, what's it called? Hope. Can't think of the title. Anyway, he's talking about signposts, and it was the same kind of imagery that I always love, where we have these signposts that point the way to something, and it's kind of like being you're in a national park, and there's a signpost that says "Go see Eagles Falls," but you can't in your mind understand what Eagles Falls look like. All you have is the pointer to it. And that's kind of the space, right? And eventually you'll get there and you'll see Eagle Falls. It'll be the most wonderful thing you've ever seen in your life, and you'll get why everybody goes there. But again, looking for these signposts through that journey and in that space is helps me understand what that means.
Yeah, I love that.
And to be able to, it's that note, like you said, it's that story of L'Engle's, and you're right, Rob, it's about the signpost. Like, you're going to trust that on the end of it, there is a Eagles Falls, right? That is there. And it's having, for me, it's about imagination. It's about being able to engage our imagination as a people of faith, and that really is lacking sometimes nowadays. You know, thankfully, us Anglicans, or as you call us, Episcopalians, we don't rattle them off by verse either, because we're more concerned about what it means than memorizing it, about engaging the questions, I guess. And I've told this story before, but it's the story of a little girl who's like maybe 4 or 5 in a church I was serving in as a student, and she was being administered communion. And it was a church where, and we're going back 25 years, so a lot of people weren't comfortable with little kids taking communion. They had to go through their first communion or confirmation, but we had sort of moved on from that. Baptized, full member, kid is a person, not a person waiting to be. So we give communion to her, and one of the adults, brought up in a meeting and said, you can't give it to the kids. They don't understand what it means. And the priest told this story, which is a true story. And it happened to me, and that I put the bread on the hand of the little girl, this little 4-year-old. And before I got a chance to go to the next person, she took her bread and she broke it. And she had a little friend with her who was on a sleepover. And she gave the second half to her friend before I could give her any, and said, Jesus should be shared. Oh. And it's the imagination. So he said, what do you mean they don't get it? He gets it better than you get it. Like, yeah. That's what it's about, So it's a powerful reminder that engaging our imagination is really important. And Leighton, your book and your poetry, which is published in that book of Martha Spong's, really does help us engage the imagination and enter into the questions. And I really wish more of us could do that. So I'm thankful for everything you've written. It's brilliant.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It means a lot.
Oh, and it's great that you could join us and share a bit about it. And we hope people will look for the book and order it real soon. And we're stuck inside. You got to read, right? So we want you to get Leighton's book and do that. So before we let you go, one thing we like to do at the Vickers Crossing, just to wrap up our time together, would you be open to a quick lightning round, a few quick questions? Okay. A few quick questions for Leighton. And if you feel you need to pass, that's fair. So first question for Leighton in the lightning round, your Twitter handle.
My Twitter handle is, sorry.
Yeah, what is your Twitter handle?
Got it, sorry. At Layton E. Williams. It's boring.
Favorite churchy word?
Perichoresis.
I would never have guessed that one.
Nicely done.
Last Netflix show you binge watched?
Well, The Flash is on Netflix, and I have been watching it for like 6 months straight on repeat. So,
being from South Carolina, if you had to have one final meal, would it be frogmore stew or chicken fried steak?
Chicken fried steak, hands down.
And I know you grew up in South Carolina, you're home there, but you went to school in Texas, is that right?
I went to seminary in Texas, yeah.
Yeah. So if you had to put on one college football jersey, would it be a Gamecock jersey or a Longhorns jersey?
Neither. I'd be a Georgia Bulldog.
Oh, there you go. Okay. Boom.
Off the chart.
Fighting word.
Were you born in Georgia?
Yeah, I was born in Georgia. Family's all here now, but I grew up in Atlanta and went to Georgia for undergrad. So
I have to let people know that I wore this shirt today. It says the Avett brothers, and they're from the Carolinas. Yeah, they're from
Concord, North Carolina.
And I noted on Twitter that Leighton is a big Avett brothers fan, and I was really blessed. Catherine Ann took me to Detroit last year for a concert. This is my favorite group, and so I said, "Look, I'm wearing the Avett brothers today." So.
I appreciate my favorite team.
Leighton, thanks so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. God bless you. We hope you stay safe and your family's safe, and we'll look forward to hearing more from you. And I'm sure, as Kevin said off the top, there'll be more books and poetry and publications coming in the long term. So we wish you all the best with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Vickers Crossing is brought to you by our good friends at A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family-owned and operated.
That's deadly.
Until we get together again, my name is Rob Henderson from Holy Trinity St. Stephen's Anglican Church in London.
And I am Kevin George, reminding you to tune in for the next 3 as well, because we've got Diana Butler-Bass, who writes the foreword for Leighton's book, Jamie Smith, and Sarah Miles coming up. So lots to listen to in the future. So stick with us. Who's the guy in the other corner?
I'm Ian. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Producer Ian. Producer Ian does so much of our technical work behind the scenes. We really appreciate all he's got to offer and all the gifts that he gives us. So take care, everybody. Have a great week until we get together again. And remember, Kevin, to always look both ways.
Before you cross the street.